I call Parfait because it's the name of the main fabric I've chosen. This is one of those really fun quilts to make that's easy to make. It's only 2 fabrics. You have your main fabric, and this can be any kind of print that you just want to show off that's a really pretty print you like. This is an all-over design. It's digital, and you'll need 2 yards of your main print. This is called Gradients Parfait by Moda, and also by Moda. The background is grunge, and this is called white paper. You'll need 3 yards of the background fabric. The main fabric is going to be cut on the lengthwise grain, and the background fabric will first cut on the crosswise grain and then on the lengthwise grain, and I'll show you how to do that. This quilt finishes at 50 inches by 68 inches approximately. The instructions are very simple. There's only 2 pages, and these are free to download. There's a link at the bottom of the video, or in show notes, sometimes they call that. So we're going to get started by first cutting out the main fabric, then we'll cut out the background fabric. We're going to start our cutting by cutting the main fabric. And the main fabric and the background fabric are both, for the most part, going to be cut along the lengthwise grain. This is the selvage here, and if you come all the way over here, this is the width of the fabric, and here's the other selvage on this side. Before you get to this point, you'll need to go through, and somewhere here in the middle is the crease made from the fabric when it was on the bolt. You'll want to go through and press that out, and if there are any other creases, press those out as well. You want to make this as flat as possible and as even as possible on these 2 ends, the selvage ends, because we're going to be cutting these long strips and you don't want any curves in them. So the longer you can make this, if you have a 24-inch ruler and you can fold this and use your longer ruler, then you're going to get more accurate cuts. So I'm going to show you how to cut along the lengthwise grain, and then I'm going to cut 4.5-inch strips times the length of the fabric. First thing we're going to do is cut off the selvage edge over here. Now, if you like to save your selvages for selvage quilts, which I just recently learned how to do, I'm going to cut off 1.5 inches. And we'll be able to do that with this fabric because there's enough width in the fabric to get all the pieces that we need. If you're not sure that you'll get enough, then start on the other end of the fabric, and then you can always cut this selvage, the pretty selvage, off later. So here we go. This is 1.5 inches, and we cut the selvage off. Now I'm going to cut 7 strips at 4.5 inches. And I'm just going to use the markings on the mat. Just make sure I've lined it up along this edge and along this edge here. So then we'll cut 7 at 4.5 inches. As you're cutting your strips, your 4.5-inch strips, after every 2 or 3 of them, you may want to check your strips to make sure that they're nice and straight, that there's no curve to them. And the best way is to lay the middle part on your mat and line up one of the lines on the ruler and make sure that it looks straight. If it's not straight, go back to your fabric here, and you might have to repress it or refold it and make sure it's straight. Another way to check is to, before you move this edge, take your ruler, and this is not going to show. I line up one of the lines with the fold here, and then I move it over to the edge, this edge, and then line up the line, and then check if your cut line is straight enough. And do that several times to make sure before you trim it off, because you might need to just trim off a little bit here, and only do that if your curves or if your strips are coming out curvy. Now after you cut the 7 at 4.5 inches, we're going to cut 4 at 1.5 inches, and that's going to be for the second border. So now we're going to do 4 at 1.5. Okay, so now we have our 4 at 1.5, and we'll put those aside. So this is your extra fabric left over. Now we're going to cut the background fabric. Most of these vertical strips, or all of these vertical strips, will be cut on the lengthwise grain, but before we do that, for the main fabric, we cut these strips at 4.5 inches, these vertical strips, and then we cut the 1.5 inches for this border. And right now all these strips are the same length, and later we'll cut those down when we add the background pieces. So now we're going to cut, first before we cut the long pieces for the background, we're going to cut these small pieces that go at the top and the bottom of each of these vertical strips. And we're going to cut crosswise grain for that. And crosswise grain is how you cut most of your fabric, and it's from selvage to selvage. Here is the selvage, and this is the fold as it comes off the bolt, and I just fold mine up and have 4 layers of fabric. So we're going to cut 3 at 4.5 inches. Now we'll put this to the side. We're going to take 2 of the strips and just unfold them once. So we have our fold is still on this side, and here is our selvage over here. And we're going to layer them. We're going to layer 2 of them. So now we still have 4 layers of fabric. I'm going to cut off the selvage. And then we're going to cut 1 at 12.5 inches. And this ruler just happens to be 12.5 inches. So I'm going to line up the bottom line and the side and cut. So you have 4 at 12.5 inches by 4.5 inches. And these 4 pieces go here, top and bottom on this one, and top and bottom on that one. So that's what we're cutting now. So put these to the side, and now the next one we're going to cut 6.5 inches. So we had 4 of those as well. And those go on the next row of vertical strips. Put this aside. Now we take the third fabric strip, cut off the selvage, and now we're going to cut 4 at 4.5 by 4.5. So this is 4.5, and I'm going to cut, there's 2 layers here, so I always cut it at 9 inches first, and then 4.5 inches. So now we have our 4 at 4.5 inches squared. And then we're going to cut 2 at 2.5 inches by 4.5 inches. And this goes at the very top and bottom of this center, vertical strip. Now we're going to fold it. We're going to open up the fabric that's left from the 3 yards, and we're going to press out the center crease and any other press creases that are in there, and we're going to fold it exactly like we did for the main fabric. We've folded this the leftover fabric. We've ironed out the crease and folded the fabric lengthwise. So here's one selvage and here's the other selvage. And now we're ready to cut the remaining background strips. The first thing you do is cut off the selvage. And then you're going to cut 14 strips at 2.5 inches wide. And I'll spare you all the details, so we'll just cut 14 strips, the length of fabric, 2.5 inches wide. Now that all the pieces are cut, we're going to piece the interior part of the quilt. And first we're going to take the 7 vertical cut strips of the main fabric, and we're going to cut them down and add the pieces, the top and bottom pieces that we cut from the background fabric. And on the first page of the instructions, it has a little chart here of what you do. So strip number 1, and it starts on the left hand side, you're going to cut the main fabric down to 34.5 inches. Then you're going to take a 12.5 inch by 4.5 inch background fabric and piece one to the top and one to the bottom of that strip, that cut strip. Now each time you sew, you trim down the main fabric strip and then add the background top and bottom. The length of the new strip should measure 58.5 inches. So when you get finished, you'll have these strips. You'll have 7 strips that have the backgrounds at the top and the bottom, and then they're all 58.5 inches long. On the second page of the instructions, you'll see this is what we're aiming for in the next step. So you've got your vertical strips, your 7 vertical strips, and they measure 58.5 inches. So you're going to take 8 of these background strips that are 2.5 inches, and we're going to trim them down to 58.5 inches long. Then you're going to take and stitch a background piece, a main fabric, background, main, all the way down. And so you'll have 8 of the long vertical strips and 7 of the main fabric strips. Now here's what the top looks like of what we just finished piecing. And you have your background strip, and this is your strip number 1 with the 12.5 inch piece sewn to the top, and there's also one at the bottom. And so it just goes on like that all the way across. And for the pressing, I press the seam open, but you can press however you like. So at this point, the side pieces of the quilt are part of the first border. So you have the side border 1 here, and then the other side border 1 here. So the next thing we're going to do is sew the top and bottom borders. And to do that, you're just going to go in order. On the very last page, there are just a few more steps. You're going to finish border 1, so it tells you what length to cut the strips, and you sew one to the top and one to the bottom. Border number 2 is your fabric, your main fabric, and that's the small little border, the 1.5 inch strips, and it tells you what size to cut those for the side, and then what size to cut for the top and bottom. And then finally you have border number 3, which is the background fabric. It's done the same way. You cut it down, you sew one to each side, and you take the 2 remaining ones, cut it down, and sew it to the top and bottom. And then your quilt is finished.